It was a bright spring afternoon in Brooklyn, the kind where the sun feels warm, but the breeze keeps things cool enough for a light jacket. The streets were alive with the usual after-school buzz. Kids heading home, parents picking up groceries, and shop owners chatting with regular customers outside their stores. Among them was a young teen boy, his backpack hanging off one shoulder and his skateboard rolling smoothly beneath his feet. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just heading home like he did every day, thinking about the math homework he needed to finish and wondering what his mom had made for dinner. The wheels of his skateboard made that familiar humming sound against the sidewalk as he carefully weaved between walking pedestrians, making sure not to bump into anyone. That's when everything changed. A police cruiser pulled up alongside him, its tires screeching slightly against the asphalt. The boy's heart started racing. He hadn't done anything wrong, but somehow he knew this wasn't going to be good. The officer stepped out, his hand already resting on his belt, his face stern and unwelcoming. "Hey you, stop right there." The officer's voice boomed across the street, causing nearby pedestrians to turn and stare. The boy's legs started trembling, but he did exactly what his parents had taught him. He stopped immediately and stayed calm. His skateboard rolled a few feet ahead before coming to a stop. What happened next felt like it was happening in slow motion, yet it was all too fast to process. The officer grabbed the boy's arm roughly, yanking him toward a nearby wall. The boy's backpack slipped off his shoulder, spilling some of his schoolbooks onto the sidewalk. His phone clattered to the ground, the screen cracking against the concrete. "But I didn't do anything." The boy's voice shook as he spoke, trying to keep his composure even as fear threatened to overwhelm him. The officer wasn't listening. Instead, he shoved the boy against the rough brick wall, pressing his face against the cold surface. The boy could feel the texture of each brick against his cheek, could smell the musty scent of old mortar. People started gathering around, their phones coming out to record what was happening. Some shouted at the officer to stop, while others called out that they were filming. An old lady who ran the corner store came outside, her voice rising above the growing crowd. "Leave that child alone. He comes by here every day after school." The boy's ears were ringing now, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He thought about his mom, who always told him to stay calm if something like this happened. He thought about his dad, who had taught him to be respectful even when others weren't respecting him. But right now, all those lessons were fighting against the pure fear coursing through his body. The crowd was getting bigger, their voices growing louder with concern and anger. Some people were calling 911. Others were shouting out their names as witnesses. The officer's grip tightened, and the boy closed his eyes, praying for someone to help him. That's when a black car pulled up to the curb. Nobody paid it much attention at first, just another vehicle in Brooklyn traffic. But in the next few moments, everything would change because stepping out of that car was someone nobody expected to see on this ordinary afternoon: Mike Tyson himself. Little did anyone know that this moment would spark a chain of events that would not only change this boy's life, but would also shine a spotlight on a problem that had been plaguing their community for far too long. The crowd fell silent as Iron Mike's presence registered, and a new chapter in this story was about to unfold. Mike Tyson wasn't supposed to be in Brooklyn that day. He'd been doing some charity work at his old gym, talking to kids about staying on the right path. The legendary boxer was feeling nostalgic, so he asked his driver to take the long way back, wanting to see the neighborhood where he grew up, to breathe in the familiar air of his old stomping grounds. He was looking out the window, lost in memories of his own childhood on these very streets, when he noticed the commotion. At first, it looked like just another crowd gathering, nothing unusual for Brooklyn. But something in his gut told him to take a closer look. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fate. Whatever it was, it made him lean forward and tell his driver to slow down. Through the tinted windows of his car, Tyson could see what was happening clear as day. A young boy, no bigger than Tyson was at that age, pressed against a wall by an officer twice his size. The sight hit him like a punch to the gut, bringing back memories of his own run-ins with authority figures when he was young, before he found boxing, before Cus D'Amato took him under his wing. "Stop the car," Tyson said, his voice calm but firm. His security team started to protest. They always did when he wanted to get involved in street situations. But Tyson was already unbuckling his seatbelt. "I said stop the car," he repeated, and this time there was no arguing with him. That tone in his voice, the one that had intimidated countless opponents in the ring, hadn't lost its power. The car hadn't even come to a complete stop when Tyson opened the door. The crowd, which had been focused on the officer and the boy, suddenly went quiet. You could hear the whispers spreading like wildfire. "Is that Mike Tyson? Iron Mike? What's he doing here?" Tyson walked toward the scene with purpose. He wasn't rushing, wasn't aggressive. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful approach was a measured one. People naturally parted to let him through, phones now divided between recording the incident with the officer and capturing Mike Tyson's unexpected appearance. As he got closer, he could hear the boy's frightened breathing, see the way his school uniform was getting scuffed against the rough brick wall. The officer hadn't noticed Tyson yet, too focused on maintaining his grip on the boy, while shouting questions that nobody could quite make out anymore. "Excuse me, officer," Tyson said, his distinctive voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The officer's head snapped around, his eyes widening as he recognized who was addressing him. The boy, still pressed against the wall, couldn't see what was happening, but he could feel the atmosphere around him changing. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Thank God," and others nodded in agreement. They all knew Mike Tyson's reputation, knew his story, knew he understood what it meant to be a black man facing injustice. But more than that, they knew he had the power, both physically and in terms of his celebrity status, to make sure this situation didn't end in tragedy. The old lady from the corner store started crying, overwhelmed by the presence of someone who could actually help. A young man who had been filming everything lowered his phone slightly, though he made sure to keep recording. This wasn't just about documenting wrongdoing anymore. This was about capturing a moment when someone with real influence stepped up to do what was right. Tyson took another step forward, his expression serious but controlled. He'd faced down the toughest fighters in the world, but right now, all his focus was on saving this one young boy from a situation he knew could go terribly wrong in an instant. The next few moments would prove crucial, and Iron Mike was ready to fight a different kind of battle, one for justice. Mike Tyson took one more careful step forward, keeping his hands visible at his sides. Years of being in the spotlight had taught him how to handle tense situations, and this one needed a delicate touch. The crowd held their breath, phones still recording, as Iron Mike cleared his throat to speak again. "Officer, I think we can handle this situation better," Tyson said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen both sides of life, the struggles and the success. "That's just a kid you're holding there. Let's talk about this." His words were calm but firm, like a father speaking to someone who'd wronged his child. The officer's grip on the boy loosened slightly, but he tried to maintain his authority. "This is police business, Mr. Tyson. I appreciate your concern, but—" Tyson raised his hand slightly, not in threat, but in a gesture that commanded attention. "I grew up right around here," Tyson continued, gesturing at the familiar streets. "And I've seen too many good kids get hurt because someone didn't take the time to think things through. That boy's scared. Look at him. Really look at him. He's wearing a school uniform. His books are scattered all over the sidewalk. What threat could he possibly be?" The crowd murmured in agreement, but Tyson wasn't playing to them. His focus remained entirely on the officer and the boy. He took another step closer, close enough now that the officer could see the sincerity in his eyes. The boy had stopped trembling, sensing that something was changing. "I know you have a job to do," Tyson acknowledged, showing respect while standing his ground. "But part of that job is protecting people, Right. Right now, you're not protecting anyone. You're scaring a child who was just trying to get home from school. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. A woman in the crowd, who turned out to be a teacher at the local middle school, spoke up. "He's one of our honor students," she called out. "I see him skateboarding home every day after math club." Her voice cracked with emotion, but she stood tall, adding her testimony to Tyson's intervention. The tension in the air started to shift. The officer looked around, suddenly aware of not just the crowd of witnesses, but also the dozen or so phones recording his every move. More importantly, he seemed to really see the boy for the first time, not as a suspect, but as someone's child. Tyson sensed the change and pressed his advantage, but gently. "Why don't you let him stand up properly? I'll stay right here. We can all talk this through like reasonable people." He paused, then added something that touched everyone who heard it. "I've made mistakes in my life, plenty of them. But I learned that real strength isn't about how much power you have. It's about how you use it." The officer's hand finally dropped away from the boy's shoulder. The kid straightened up slowly, his school uniform wrinkled and dusty from the brick wall. His eyes were wide with a mix of fear and disbelief as he looked up at Mike Tyson, his unexpected protector. The crowd let out a collective sigh of relief, but Tyson knew this moment was about more than just one incident. It was about setting an example, about showing that standing up for what's right doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means being the voice of reason in a chaotic situation. As the boy picked up his scattered books, Tyson placed himself between him and the officer, not aggressively but protectively. The legendary boxer who had once been known for his ferocity was now showing a different kind of strength, the kind that comes from wisdom, from understanding that real courage often means finding a peaceful way forward. The next few minutes would be crucial for everyone involved, and Tyson was prepared to see this through to the end. This wasn't just about one boy anymore. It was about showing the world that change is possible when people stand up for what's right, no matter who they are or where they come from. The officer shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation had evolved. His hand moved to his belt, not for his weapon, but for his radio. A nervous habit many cops develop over years on the force. But before he could say anything, Tyson spoke again. "You know," Tyson said, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd seen both the highest highs and lowest lows life could offer, "I bet if we all take a moment to breathe, we'll find there's been a big misunderstanding here." He gestured toward the boy's skateboard, which still lay a few feet away. "That board's pretty beat up. Tells me he uses it every day to get around. This isn't some troublemaker. This is just a kid trying to get home." The officer cleared his throat, attempting to justify his actions. "There was a report of suspicious activity in the area," he began, but even as the words left his mouth, they sounded hollow. The crowd's collective eye roll was almost audible. "Suspicious activity," Tyson repeated, not mockingly, but with genuine concern. "I've heard those words before. Too many times. They followed me around these same streets when I was younger." He paused, looking around at the gathering of neighbors, parents, and local shop owners. "But what I see right now is a community. I see people who know this young man, who watch him grow up, who see him pass by their shops and homes every day." The corner store owner stepped forward again, clutching her apron. "He helps me carry my deliveries inside sometimes," she added, her voice stronger now, with Tyson's presence backing her up. "Never asks for anything in return. Just does it because that's how he was raised." A crossing guard from the nearby intersection joined in. "I see him every morning and afternoon," she said. "Always says hello, always follows the traffic signals. Even reminds other kids to wait for the walk sign." The officer's face began to redden. The suspicious activity report was looking thinner by the second. Tyson noticed a change in the officer's demeanor and recognized an opportunity to bridge the gap. "Listen," Tyson said, lowering his voice so the officer wouldn't feel like he was being publicly shamed. We all make snap judgments sometimes. I've made plenty myself. But the real measure of a person isn't in the mistakes they make, it's in how they handle those mistakes once they realize them. The boy, who had been quietly gathering his scattered belongings, looked up at Tyson with a mix of gratitude and awe. His hands were still shaking slightly as he picked up his cracked phone, but his eyes showed a growing confidence. "Officer," Tyson continued, "you have a chance right now to show everyone here, especially this young man, what good policing really looks like. You can show him that the badge you wear means protection, not intimidation. That when you make a mistake, you own it and make it right." The crowd watched in tense silence as the officer processed Tyson's words. The minutes seemed to stretch on forever, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic and the occasional click of someone's phone camera. Finally, the officer's shoulders relaxed slightly. He looked at the boy, then at Tyson, then at the community members gathered around them. The weight of the moment, and the opportunity it presented, seemed to sink in. This wasn't just about avoiding a PR nightmare anymore. It wasn't about the fact that Mike Tyson was there, or that dozens of phones were recording. It was about something more fundamental, the relationship between law enforcement and the community they're supposed to protect and serve. The news spread through Brooklyn like wildfire. Within hours, cell phone videos of Mike Tyson standing up for the young boy were everywhere on social media. People weren't just sharing the videos, they were sharing their own stories, their own experiences, their own hopes for change. Local community leaders started calling emergency meetings. The corner store owner opened up her shop that evening for people to gather and talk about what happened. The place was packed. Parents, teachers, retired cops, young people, all squeezed between shelves of groceries, sharing their thoughts about what they'd witnessed. "I never thought I'd see the day," said an elderly man who'd lived in the neighborhood for over 50 years. Mike Tyson, the same kid who used to run these streets, coming back to protect one of our own. That's something special. People nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears. The boy's story touched something deep in the community's heart. It wasn't just about one incident anymore. It had become a symbol of both what was wrong and what could be made right. Phone calls started pouring into local news stations. Community organizations that had been fighting for police reform for years suddenly found themselves in the spotlight. A local youth center director stood up during the gathering. "This is our chance," she said, her voice full of emotion. "Not just to complain about what's wrong, but to work together to fix it." When Mike Tyson stepped in today, he showed us something important, that we all have the power to make a difference. The videos kept spreading, but they weren't just going viral. They were starting conversations. In barbershops, in churches, in school hallways, people were talking about more than just what happened. They were talking about solutions, about building bridges between the police and the community, about making sure no other kid would have to go through what that young boy experienced. Teachers at the local middle school used the incident as a teaching moment. They had their students write essays about standing up for what's right, about the difference between power and justice. One teacher even invited retired police officers to speak to her class about building trust between law enforcement and young people. The boy's mother, who rushed to the scene after getting calls from neighbors, became an unexpected voice for change. She wasn't angry, she was determined. "My son," she told the gathering at the corner store, "will not be defined by this moment of fear. He'll be defined by the moment our community stood up for him." Local artists started creating murals on nearby buildings. One showed two hands clasped together, one wearing a boxing glove, the other a police badge. Another depicted a skateboard transformed into a bridge, connecting different parts of the community. The art wasn't just beautiful, it was healing. The story caught the attention of civil rights organizations and community advocacy groups across the city. They saw an opportunity to push for meaningful changes in police training and community relations. But what made this different from other incidents was the way Mike Tyson had handled it. With strength, yes, but also with wisdom and respect. People started sharing old photos of Tyson from his early days in Brooklyn, remembering how far he'd come, how much he'd learned, and how he'd chosen to use his influence when it mattered most. Young people in the neighborhood began saying things like, "Iron Mike showed us that real strength isn't about fighting. It's about standing up for what's right." The corner store owner put up a simple sign in her window that read, "Community Stronger Together." Within days, similar signs appeared in windows all over the neighborhood. It wasn't just a slogan. It was becoming reality, as people who'd lived as neighbors for years finally started really talking to each other, really listening to each other. The police department couldn't ignore what happened. The videos had gone viral, and the public demanded answers. But instead of the usual defensive response, something different happened. The police chief called for a full investigation, and for once, it felt like more than just empty words. Inside the precinct, officers were divided. Some defended their colleague, saying the job was tough and split-second decisions had to be made. Others, especially the younger officers, saw it differently. Mike Tyson showed us how to de-escalate without losing authority. One rookie cop said during a morning briefing, "That's the kind of policing we should be doing." The internal affairs investigation moved quickly. They interviewed everyone: the store owners, the teachers, the crossing guard, and dozens of other witnesses. But what really made a difference were all those phone videos. There was no room for doubt when you could see everything from multiple angles. The officer involved was put on desk duty while the investigation continued. But instead of staying quiet, he did something unexpected. He asked to meet with community leaders. "I've been thinking about what Mr. Tyson said," he told them, "about real strength and how we use our power. I want to learn from this." Local news crews camped outside the police station, hoping for updates. They caught sight of Mike Tyson walking in one morning, not for questioning, but for a meeting he requested with the police leadership. He spent 3 hours inside. When he came out, reporters swarmed around him. "Look," Tyson told the cameras, speaking slowly and thoughtfully, "I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here because we need to fix something that's broken. These officers, they have a tough job. But our kids, they have it tough too. We need to find a way to make both sides feel safe." The investigation revealed systemic problems in police training. The department had focused so much on tactical response that they'd forgotten about human connection. The chief announced new training programs, but this time they'd be different. Community members would be involved, sharing their perspectives, helping officers understand the neighborhood they served. The boy's testimony was powerful but dignified. He didn't speak with anger, even though he had every right to be angry. Instead, he talked about his dreams, about wanting to become a lawyer someday, about hoping to make his community better. His words touched hearts on both sides of the badge. During the investigation, something unexpected happened. Officers started getting out of their cars more, walking the streets, talking to people. They'd stop at the corner store for coffee, chat with kids at the skateboard park, get to know the neighborhood not as a patrol zone, but as a community. The officer who'd confronted the boy was required to undergo additional training, but he also volunteered to work with youth programs in the community. "I want to earn back trust," he said, "not just for myself, but for the badge I wear." Mike Tyson's testimony to internal affairs was straightforward and fair. He didn't call for punishment. He called for change. "I've made mistakes in my life," he told the investigators. "Big ones. But I learned from them." That's what we need here: learning, understanding, growth. The investigation's findings led to new department policies. Every officer would now spend time each month in community engagement activities. Body cameras would be reviewed regularly, not just when incidents occurred. Training would include sessions with community members, learning about the neighborhood's history, its challenges, and its dreams. But perhaps the most important change wasn't in any official report. It was in the way people started seeing each other. Officers began to see kids on skateboards as just that, kids on skateboards. And young people began to see officers as human beings capable of both mistakes and growth. In the weeks that followed, the young boy found himself dealing with mixed emotions. Some days were harder than others. The memory of being pushed against that wall would sometimes come back when he least expected it. But something else was happening too, something powerful that helped him heal. Mike Tyson kept his word about staying involved. He didn't just disappear after the investigation. Instead, he started showing up at the local community center, talking to kids about his own struggles growing up in Brooklyn. He wasn't just telling his boxing stories, he was sharing real-life lessons about facing fear, standing up for what's right, and the true meaning of strength. The boy started joining these sessions, sitting quietly at first, then gradually finding his voice. One day, he raised his hand and asked Tyson, "How did you know to stop that day? How did you know what to say to the officer?" The room fell silent, everyone eager to hear the answer. Tyson thought for a moment before responding. "You know, when I was your age, I was angry at the world. I got into trouble, made bad choices. But I had people who believed in me, who showed me a better way. That day, I just wanted to be that person for you." His words touched everyone in the room, especially the young people who'd faced similar situations. The community center became a hub of activity. They started a program called Building Bridges, where young people and police officers could meet in a safe space, share their stories, and learn from each other. The boy who'd been confronted that day became one of the program's most active participants. Local businesses got involved too. The skateboard shop donated boards to kids who couldn't afford them. The corner store owner started a homework club in her back room, where kids could study and get snacks after school. Even some of the police officers would stop by to help with math problems or just chat with the students. The boy's mother noticed changes in her son. He was standing taller, speaking more confidently. Instead of being defined by what happened to him, he was defining himself by what he could do to help others. He started mentoring younger kids, teaching them both skateboarding tricks and how to handle difficult situations with wisdom beyond his years. One afternoon, while practicing skateboard moves in the park, the boy noticed a police car pull up. His heart still skipped a beat, but this time it was different. The officer who stepped out was one of the regulars from the community center. He watched the kids skateboarding for a while, then asked if they could teach him how to stand on a board. The kids couldn't help laughing as the officer wobbled and nearly fell. It was a moment that would have seemed impossible just months before. The local middle school invited the boy to speak at an assembly. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of his peers, he took a deep breath and shared his story. But he didn't focus on the fear or the anger. Instead, he talked about what he learned from Mike Tyson, about turning negative experiences into positive change. That day could have ended so differently, he told his classmates. But because someone cared enough to stop and help, it became the beginning of something good. Now it's our turn to be that person for somebody else. The applause that followed wasn't just polite clapping. It was the sound of hope and determination. The story could have been just another viral video, another moment of outrage that faded away. Instead, it became a turning point, a lesson about the power of community and the importance of standing up for what's right. And at the center of it all was a kid with a skateboard, whose courage in facing fear helped change his neighborhood for the better. Being a mentor wasn't something Mike Tyson had planned, but the experience changed him too. He started coming to Brooklyn more often, not just for fancy events or photo ops, but to spend real time with the kids at the community center. He'd sit there for hours, listening to their dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. The young boy who'd faced that scary moment became someone special in Iron Mike's life. Tyson saw something of himself in the kid, that same mix of vulnerability and strength, that same need to prove that he was more than what others might see at first glance. You know what's funny? Tyson told him one day while they were sitting on the community center steps. "People always expect me to talk about boxing, about fighting. But the hardest fights aren't in the ring. They're the ones we face every day, just trying to do what's right." The boy nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Word spread about what was happening in Brooklyn. Other neighborhoods wanted to know how they could start similar programs. The boy and Tyson were invited to speak at schools across the city. They made an odd but powerful pair, the legendary boxer and the kid with the skateboard, sharing their story of how one moment of injustice led to real change. The police department noticed something interesting too. In areas where they'd started the new community programs, reports of confrontations between officers and young people dropped significantly. Officers who spent time at the community center found themselves handling tense situations differently, taking that extra moment to think before reacting. One day, a rookie officer approached the boy after a community meeting. "I saw the video of what happened to you," he said. "It's part of our training now. They show it to us as an example of what not to do, but also as an example of how a bad situation can turn into something good if people are willing to learn and change." The skateboard park became a symbol of the change. Police officers would sometimes stop by just to chat with the kids, even learning a few basic moves themselves. The boy taught a few of them how to balance on a board, leading to some funny moments that ended up on social media, this time for all the right reasons. Local artists painted a new mural on the community center wall. It showed a diverse group of hands reaching toward each other, forming a bridge between different parts of the community. At the center was a skateboard and a police badge, side by side, surrounded by words like unity, understanding, and growth. The boy's grades started improving too. His teachers noticed he was more focused, more engaged. When they asked what changed, he told them, "I learned that my voice matters. That standing up for what's right doesn't always mean fighting back. Sometimes it means being strong enough to help others understand." Mike Tyson brought other athletes and celebrities to visit the community center. But he made sure they understood. This wasn't about photo ops or publicity. This was about showing kids that success doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. It means coming back to help others find their way. The corner store owner, who'd witnessed everything from that first scary day, kept a special shelf behind her counter. On it was a photo of Tyson with the local kids, including the boy who started it all. Next to it was a sign that read, "Heroes come in all sizes. Sometimes they ride skateboards. Sometimes they're former boxing champions. But they're always people who care enough to stop and help." Parents in the neighborhood started noticing changes in their own children. Kids were talking more openly about their feelings, about their encounters with police, about their hopes for the future. But most importantly, they were talking about solutions, not just problems. 1 year after that fateful day in Brooklyn, the community gathered for a special celebration. The old basketball court behind the community center had been transformed into a brand new youth space, with a skateboard park on one side and study areas on the other. A small plaque near the entrance told the story of how it all began, with one scary moment that could have ended badly, but instead sparked real change. Mike Tyson was there for the opening, of course. He didn't make a big speech. He didn't need to. Everyone knew the role he played in making this happen. Instead, he stood back and watched as the young boy who'd faced such fear a year ago cut the ribbon to open the new park. The boy had grown taller over the year, but he'd grown in other ways too. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by confidence, not arrogance, but the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. He'd become a leader among his peers, not because he wanted to be, but because they saw something in him, the same thing Tyson had seen that day. "You know what's amazing?" the boy said to the crowd gathered for the opening. "A year ago, I thought I was alone, but I wasn't. I had my community. I had Mike Tyson. And now, we all have each other." His words weren't rehearsed, they came straight from his heart, and everyone felt it. The police department had changed too. The officer who'd confronted the boy that day was there at the opening. He'd gone through extensive training, done a lot of soul searching, and become an advocate for community policing. He and the boy had even worked together on some youth programs, turning their difficult beginning into something positive. Local businesses had gotten involved in their own ways. The skateboard shop started a program where kids could earn boards through community service. The corner store became a safe space where police officers and young people could grab a snack and just talk. Small changes, maybe, but they added up to something bigger. The young kids who came to skate would often gather around to hear the story. They'd look at the old viral video, then look at their community now, amazed at how things had changed. But remember, the boy would tell them, change isn't just about one moment. It's about what you do every day after that moment. Mike Tyson's involvement didn't fade away either. He'd found something here that meant more to him than any boxing title. A chance to help shape young lives, to show them that their worst moments didn't have to define them. He became a regular visitor, sometimes just sitting quietly, watching the kids skate, offering a word of encouragement here and there. The program they'd started had spread to other neighborhoods, other cities even. People would come to Brooklyn to see how it worked, to learn how one community had turned a moment of potential tragedy into lasting positive change. But it wasn't just about the programs or the policies. It was about the people, the relationships, the trust that had been built. As the sun set on the opening day celebration, the boy stood at the top of the skateboard ramp, looking out over his community. Police officers chatted with parents, kids showed off their skating tricks, and everyone seemed to understand something important. That real change doesn't come from fighting against each other, but from working together. Mike Tyson walked up beside him, put a hand on his shoulder, and said something simple but powerful. You see all this. This is your legacy. Not what happened to you, but what you helped create because of it. That's real strength. That's real courage. And that's how a story that could have been about fear and division became one about hope and unity. It showed that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, and that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they ride skateboards, sometimes they're former boxing champions, and sometimes they're just ordinary people who care enough to stop and help.